Mark O writes, "Hey AMC crew, love your show and hope you never end it. My question is about Rotten Tomatoes and critics in general. How come being a movie critic is a job? I mean, they are just normal people who like some movies and dislike others, just like me and you. So why should they be the ones who will determine how good a movie is by leaving a rating that we can see just by Googling a movie? Thanks and keep up the great work."
This question comes up about film critics all the time. First of all, let's be really clear. I'm not a film critic. I'll do some movie reviews. And I think sometimes, so my mother understands what it is I do for a living, I'll sometimes use the phrase film critic, or that's what my mom said, but I'm not really a film critic. I have a different idea in my head about what a film critic is than some of the people. The real film critics are a lot of people with like journalism degrees and film history degrees and whatever, and can write a 6-page paper, an article about, and dissecting a film. I love real film critics. I can read real film critics all day. And it's not necessarily people I have to agree with. Now, let's get back to the part of your question you're asking there, Mark, about aren't they just average people like you and me, giving an opinion on a movie? Well, yes, sort of, but only in the same way that an actor is just a regular person standing in front of a camera reading lines they memorized. Or a plumber is just a regular guy who's going under your sink to turn a wrench. I mean, you can turn a wrench, right? The difference is there are certain people who are trained and educated and have huge, vast experience and really understand film, and then they dissect it for us. Look, a lot of people, when they judge film critics, I think people judge film critics on the completely wrong scale. Most film fans judge a film critic based on whether or not they like the same movies you do. That's what they say. Oh, this guy likes all the movies I like, that means he's a good film critic. If he doesn't like movies I like, that means he's a bad film critic. That's a total nonsense definition or way of evaluating a film critic. Two of my favorite film critics of all time. Number one, Roger Ebert. I think I might have agreed with him less than half the time. But his skill and knowledge and history in the industry, when he would write his reviews and his insight, and he'd give opinions that I disagreed with, but then he would break down and analyze why he thought that, I came away enriched. Even though I didn't agree with his premise, and I liked the movie when he didn't, whatever. But because he was so skilled and gifted, I believe, at breaking down his whys on everything and looking at it in a historical perspective as well, I would always come away from reading his stuff feeling a little bit smarter. Another guy that I maybe agree with a little bit more than half the time, Ty Burr from the Boston Globe. I read as many of his reviews as I can, and I only agree with him about half the time. But by reading it, and I like the ones I disagree with him the most, I walk away feeling I'm a little bit smarter than before I started reading. It's great, and too many of us put on these visors, It's kind of like, this is a problem I always say is wrong with the American political environment. It's like people who are Republicans only watch Fox, people who are Democrats only watch MSNBC. It's like, no, I only listen to people who already say things I already agree with. That's how you make a nation of idiots. And I believe the same is true of movie. I believe it's in diversifying yourself. So critics don't say whether or not a movie is good. They give their opinion about whether it's good and why they think it. And for me as a film fan, reading them is just overall a good way of enriching my film-going experience and my experience of being a film fan in general. And guys who are really good at it are rare. And guys who make you walk away knowing more about film than when you first started watching them are rare. And I think we need more of those guys, and we have a real tragic lack of them today. That's just the way I see it. Dennis, how do you see it?
While I do have a film degree, I do not have a journalism degree, and I don't really consider myself a film critic. I consider myself informed about movies and can give an informed opinion. And yeah, I think he's I don't know, maybe giving less credit to these people than he should. It's not like some simple thing where it's like, hey, I'm just going to stand up and be a film critic. Because if anybody could be a film critic, you would just have a lot of crappy opinions, I remember I did a review of Prince of Persia once, and one of the comments I got was, I can't believe you're talking about the camera angles in this movie. You have lost all credibility. And I was like, oh man, you would not want someone like that being a film critic.
Right.
Because they don't know what they're talking about. So my opinion is I would rather hear someone who has an informed opinion and who's studied it and knows the history and also the behind the scenes stuff.
And you don't have to agree with
No,
what it is they're
not
saying.
at all.
It's just it's enriching even when you don't agree with them. Anyway, Schnepp.
Well, for me, it's like film criticism is someone like Jonathan Rosenbaum, who's like an incredible, in-depth film critique of the film and the industry and how films are made and genres. So that's someone that I'll read versus just a film critic who will, sometimes a lot of film reviews just simply repeat the plot and give away a lot of what I don't want to know when I'm seeing it. I might see this movie. I'm not going to read your reviews because all you're doing is regurgitating the story and listing off the actors and then saying, I found this part to be cool. You know, that's what unfortunately, a lot of film reviews are that are out all across America now and across the world. They're very simplistic. So someone like Roger Ebert, sometimes I'd know I'd like the film if he hated it.
Right.
You know, it's like if Roger Ebert was like, I hated it because of this, and I was like, oh, he just listed off 6 things that I love.
Right.
Also, sometimes he would love a film for all the reasons that I love, and I agree with you. I think he was one of the best film critics around. I loved him and Siskel too, just their back and forth. And I'd always usually disagree with Siskel. He was so whiny. He's like, I didn't like it because of this. Well, definitely, I'm seeing it now. If Siskel loves it, I'm gonna hate it. You know, it's like one of those kind of things. So it's good to have people bounce off each other as well. I don't consider myself a film critic. I love films, I love fantasy, comic books, all that kind of stuff, and I'm super opinionated. So I mean, like, if someone's going to come at me and tell me why they hate a movie that I love, I could, argue with them or just talk with them. You know, like I was talking to you guys earlier, I was talking to someone who absolutely hated Star Trek Into Darkness, and just because of the way he was talking about it, I was like, wait. You're like a super Trekkie Star Trek nerd, right? You love the original series. I was like, yes, of course. The only one is Captain Kirk. William Shatner was like, aha! It was just like, chink in the armor, like, now we can actually discuss
they're not
this.
coming from an unbiased opinion.
Correct.
They're coming from their hardcore fanboy opinion. And
coming into a film, hating a film. So it's one of those things.
When they're not coming up from objectively and looking at the different, things. I mean, if someone who isn't a Trekkie said they didn't like Into Darkness and they told me why, they didn't like the plot, they didn't like this actor, then I wouldn't agree with them, but I would say, okay, you have some valid points and criticisms that, while I don't agree with, I respect. And there is an exception to what I was talking about before about the informed film critic. Armand White is someone that he's got a deep film history, he's got a degree, he's like got all this background. The reason why I don't respect his opinion is because he's a contrarian.
Yeah.
It's not because
He's a pure contrarian.
it's not because he doesn't have the knowledge. It's he takes that knowledge and he twists it and turns it. And if you ever read any of his movie reviews, he talks about movies and he talks to them from a different perspective than what the movie's actually about. He takes either a political or social angle that's not even present in the movie. And so what ends up happening is he'll take these movies that are just like terrible and talk about them like these masterpieces, like a movie like Lottery Ticket,
Right.
or Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. He would talk about how operatic it was and stuff like that. So someone like that is like for me the exception to the rule, where they're not using their knowledge for good.
I think the word for that is hipster. You're talking about a
Well,
hipster.
the thing with a guy like Armand White, though, is I've stopped even worrying about Armand White because I don't believe he believes the things he's saying. I think you're right. He's a contrarian.
Yeah.
So I don't even believe he thinks. I mean, he gave Toy Story 3 a rotten review. But
All
it's
the Pixar movies he
all
hates.
and all the terrible. But I think I just came to the belief that, you know what, even he doesn't believe what he's writing. I believe he's just doing it to be contrarian. But I wanted to bring up one other thing really here quick. Since we got a Rotten Tomatoes thing up here and you were asking about Rotten Tomatoes, and this is almost a little bit of a side note, but get a lot of people often ask me, Rotten Tomatoes doesn't know what they're talking about, or Rotten Tomatoes is always right. Just to be clear here, Rotten Tomatoes doesn't do movie reviews. Rotten Tomatoes doesn't give any movie a score. What Rotten Tomatoes does, and this is why I find them to be a really valuable service to film fans, is what they do is they just go out and see all the film critics, like newspaper guys, online guys, TV guys, whatever they take all the film critics, hundreds of them, say how many of them gave the movie a positive review, how many of them gave it a negative review, and they just tell us what the score is. They don't make up a score, they just tell us what the score is, that 83% of the critics like this, or only 15% of the critics like this. That's what Rotten Tomatoes does. They don't give something a score. So I just thought I'd mention that really quick.
I wanted to add one little thing about the Star Trek conversation I had with this guy is the points that he brought up were totally valid. They weren't like, oh, you're wrong because you're a Trekkie. I could see why a Trekkie would find it disrespectful because it was like, there's 24 years of canon and then they just throw it away. And I was like, but that's why I liked it. So it was just a simple opinion of like, especially that Spock-Kirk death scene where Spock's like, Khan! That's what I think really rubbed Trekkies wrong. Because
I loved it.
I loved it because it was
because they
were like,
flipped it.
I can't believe they even used the same dialogue. It's like, I know, wasn't that awesome? They're like, no. They're like, it really is like this polar opposite thing, and it really just comes from just how you perceive it. Whether you're cool with reinterpreting something or not. So.
If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to AMC Movie News on YouTube. It's free and a great way to stay updated with all the latest movie news and check out our daily show, AMC Movie Talk. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Twitter to stay in the loop for our special prizes, giveaways, and contests.